I spend a lot of my time teaching other people how to play Football Manager, but as hard as this might be to believe, I'm not perfect. I know I might look it, this forehead carved by the Greek gods. Thank you, Zeus. But I, in fact, have never claimed to be perfect. Instead, I actually am somebody that makes a lot of mistakes while I play Football Manager, and over the course of the last save that I played on Twitch, I tried to keep track of the ones that were plaguing me the most. And the first one is that I adjust way too early. All the time. You know how it happens? You're in the thick of the moment, you're in the middle of a match, and you have a beautiful plan cooked up, but in minute 3, the other team scores off a corner kick, or the other team gets one unfortunate counterattack against you and scores a goal, so you have to cook up a mastermind response. Maybe this comes from the fact that I'm streaming basically all of the saves that I play. You can check them out at the Twitch link in the description if for some reason you didn't already know that existed, but I feel the need to have an answer for everything, when sometimes, in fact, you can have the right plan in place, but your players just make a mistake. But over the course of the 90 minutes, the plan you put in place is actually the better one. The key here is to only make the change when it's actually absolutely necessary. And there was a great incident that kind of illustrated this for me over the course of my recent save trying to save Manchester United. You see, I played a match against West Ham, and in that match, I won 3-0, but it required a sparkling halftime team talk and a major tactical adjustment to get there. But, and this is another mistake that I apparently make sometimes, I didn't have post-match autosaves on and the game crashed. When I went back to play the match again, I remembered what I'd done in the second half in response to how West Ham was playing in the first half in order to win 3-0. And when West Ham promptly went up 1-0 early in the first half, I decided to switch into that tactic right away. You see, in the first match I was playing, the one before I got Thanos snapped by the Football Manager gods, it was the right decision, obviously. But in the second match, the new match, I went to it because I thought it would be the right decision again. But the conditions earlier in the match were completely different. Not to mention that the match was, of course, always going to play out differently every single time you simulate it. You're never going to get an exact carbon copy of a match 2 times in a row. But it was after this incident that I sat there on my thinking stump and realized that those changes, they weren't necessary. And in fact, they left me far too exposed. And so I got my ass kicked a couple more times by West Ham. So that was fun. Made me question everything. It was great. I had a great time. The second mistake I make all the time is that I play reserve players when I don't need to. This is 100% on me just being lazy. I am naturally lazy. It is my predisposition. I wake up at a leisurely 10:30 and saunter on over to start playing Football Manager for 12 hours and making videos about it and so on and so forth. I live my life finding ways to streamline things so that I have to do less. But one of the things I shouldn't be streamlining is that little reserve selection screen. This one, where you're trying to figure out who's supposed to play with the reserves so that they can get match sharpness. You see, I'm also a little OCD about this. I really need all of those thumbs to be up, and if they're not, it really bothers me because it makes me feel like I'm unsuccessfully managing the player's time. So far too often I go into the reserve selection screen and I put a bunch of players in there that don't have full match sharpness, only to get to the match day and realize that 1 or 2 or 5 of those players were going to be a part of my match day squad. Now there is a solution for this, one that I am trying to drill myself to do. If you have a reserve match within, 4 days of your actual match, not some international break nonsense, but an actual reserve match within a couple of days of your match, you should pick your starting lineup before that reserve match. It obviously can be subject to change, but once you select your starting lineup and have that starting 11 in place, you can assess who is actually able to play in the reserve match or not. Because anything that's going to reduce the heart condition from anything outside of like the full-blown fluorescent green that means they are A-okay to go is stupid. Because at the end of the day, the reserve match doesn't matter, and the match you're actually playing does. So even if the guy can play 60 or 75 minutes after the reserve match, but you needed him to be able to play a full 90 in a gegenpress, it was a stupid decision. I'm talking to myself in a mirror here. I'm not even talking to you. But fortunately, I am not always talking to myself. In fact, I've started a podcast with Inter Miami player Julian Gressel, and it's fantastic. He starts right behind Lionel Messi in every match. We get to talk about the inner workings of playing with the GOAT, and just the inner workings of playing as a professional footballer who has caps for the United States national team. And of course, we talk about all the other news of the day and catch you up on the next 7 players that Chelsea has signed. We've had a lot of fun recording the first few episodes. It's called Player Manager, and it now has a YouTube channel where we will be releasing video versions of the podcast. So if you want to hear me talking with an actual professional player about football, soccer, whatever, then check that out. It'll be at the top of the description and links to wherever you get your podcasts. It's already there. You remember that story about Lionel Messi speaking English to his teammates for the first time? That actually came from the demo episode of our podcast and a story that Julian Gressel was telling about Lionel Messi speaking to him in English. So we do talk about some really cool stuff sometime. I hope to be a part of it someday. We've also learned in the first few episodes that Luis Suarez is an avid Football Manager player. Speaking of which, back to the task at hand. Another mistake I make is I far too often fail to visualize that people on support roles can do actual attacking. This is something I've fallen back into recently, and it's almost embarrassing for me to admit. I want you to watch this team fluidity in the bottom left, and you see how I have 4 different players on an attacking duty, and if I drop one to support, it goes from structured to flexible. This illustrates a key difference that I just overlook too often when I'm designing tactics, particularly ones where players are deeper on the field, because I'm afraid that just having them on support isn't going to be good enough for them to be able to get into the area. But when you have 4 players on attack out of this 4-3-3, that means it's a bit more structured. The players have less freedom to decide where they are going to move, and you are telling them more strictly where they have to move. And particularly on a role like advanced playmaker, perhaps that keeps Bruno Fernandes out of the early parts of a passing play because it forces him to run up the field far more than he otherwise would. And it's not like a center mid on support or an advanced playmaker on support aren't going to get themselves up the field from time to time. They just aren't going to do it militantly because they're not being forced to do it in a structured fluidity system. An anti-fluidity system. This isn't an issue I have that requires a complex solution. I'm basically including it in this video as a reminder to myself that I need to stop doing that and let players play on support, and I will still be able to score goals. Because believe it or not, even if you're chasing a match right at the end, having everybody on attack is not a good idea. Let's say I cook this tactic up, for example, to try and get the ball into the other box. Well, by the time my 2 center backs are in possession, everybody else is going to be wind sprinting forward and there's no connecting play at all. You need to be able to create that middle level instead of just having everybody go forward. Something like this at least gives you a couple of players that can connect the play. The next mistake I make is probably the stupidest and simplest one on this entire list, because I've made entire tutorials about how to use the data hub. But if you ever watch one of my streams, I never freaking use the data hub, ever. I don't use it. I forget it exists 99% of the time. Not even 99. Like, watch this. If I go to goal output for forwards, I'm gaining information that would have informed my decision making the entire season I played with Manchester United. We had acquired Kvaratskhelia and Julio Enciso, and it turns out Julio Enciso was out assisting and out XGing Kvaratskhelia by a lot in the same position and should have been the starter. In fact, is the same on the right wing where Bradley Barcola was really outperforming Alejandro Garnacho, even though in my brain, Garnacho was the player that was a better goal threat because he had a really hot run at the beginning of the season. We have our open play expected assist per 90 and non-penalty XG per 90, and it's very, very clear who the favorites are in those 2 positions. Also, and I hate to admit this, Antony wasn't as bad as I thought he was. Another key distinction is I started leaving Casemiro out of the team all the time because I thought his passing was a significant issue, when it turns out his pass completion percentage was one of the best in the league. So those turnovers that had gotten stuck in my brain were actually just outliers. This also would have helped me figure out that Bruno Fernandes was not getting involved in nearly enough progressive passes. There he is hiding behind Takakubo's name, but you see his progressive passes per 90 are way below what I would expect from one of the best playmakers in the league, which means I should have changed up my tactic a long time ago. Then there's this possession table for midfielders where I would have noticed that Scott McTominay was literally winning possession off other teams more than any other midfielder per 90 in the entire league. So I probably should have played him more over Casemiro because I kind of froze both those guys out for Fabian, who didn't really do any of that fun stuff and didn't make up for it with excellent passing performances. I mean, it's really a balance. He had a lot of progressive passes, most in the league per 90, but his completion rate was lower than Mason Mount's, which is not what we wanted. Maybe if we'd lowered the tempo. See, I could have had all these conversations with myself. I just never remember to look at the dang thing and just want to smash continue. Next is the fact that player training can reset due to injury. I'm fortunate and that there's just a lot of people kind of hanging out watching me play my save. So eventually they will point out the fact that my players' positional training has changed. You know, they're all in the chat and they go, Zealand, you don't have positional training on Casemiro. And I go, thank you. But if you don't have a chat of wonderful human beings watching you play Football Manager, this is a really important thing that you overlook. Or wait, no, this is things I overlook. I'd be screwed if I didn't have chat. That's it. Now what I mean here is if you go to list, you can see the position training. And we already have a couple. Bradley Barkala doesn't have any position training because of an injury. Lewis Miley doesn't have position training because of an injury. And Marcelo Wygant and Brandon Williams. All of them were removed. And remember, if you don't have position training on a player, they train significantly worse. And even a minor injury can knock it off them. And if you don't notice for months, particularly on a developing player or an aging player that's trying to hang on to their attributes, that can have a really significant effect. I also forget to renew my scouting stuff. This is so stupid, it requires basically no explanation. This is just me being a super genius. You see, at the start of this season with Manchester United, I had about 5 recruitment focuses. I have 31 scouts for crying out loud. But for whatever reason, I don't set them as ongoing. I always just set them as top, and I have to renew them. It's this inbox message that comes in and you have to click renew at the bottom and then whoa, you've renewed. 60% of the scouting reports that I was trying to get, I missed that inbox message at some point and did not renew, at which point a lot of my scouts were getting paid to do absolutely nothing. Kind of like whoever takes care of Tottenham's trophies, am I right? Yeah, okay. All right. If you're gonna scout like me and just have the same thing set up all season, just put it in ongoing. You can assign the number of scouts, just put it in ongoing. Zealand, put it in ongoing. Okay. Next thing that I do wrong. I trust attributes too much. That might sound strange, considering attributes are our gods, and we pray to them every day before we open Football Manager for grace and kindness. But attributes are not everything. Form, and of course the hidden attributes that affect the ability to create and sustain form, are a very important part of the game, and form in general is very real in Football Manager. It's not just the numbers to the right of your player in the selection info, it's more than that. See, part of the reason you might be having a giant dip in form around the middle of the season is you have a couple of players that get out of form at the same time, and that can just start to sink your side. What I will typically do is trust the attributes and be like, oh, they're going to come good eventually, and leave those players out there. When what you really should do is rotate in somebody that might be a little worse on paper with the attributes, but isn't in terrible form at the moment. And if you need to reinforce this train of thought, how many times have you played your backups and dominated after matches and matches of watching your starters flounder against worse opposition? I'm not saying I need to do whole-scale line changes after losing one match, but if there are players that are dropping consistently more poor ratings, it's worth swapping them out, even if you think the player you're swapping in is just worse on paper. It's a part of Football Manager where actually treating Football Manager like you're doing the real-life thing makes you better at the game. Because if you boil it all the way down to just the numbers you can see, those aren't all the numbers at play. That's the truth. Oh, this next one's bad. I don't like this one. This one makes me uncomfortable. I used to be the king of set pieces. Now I don't pay attention to them at all, and it actually hurts me. Over the course of the last couple of matches of this save, I gave up a lot of goals from the edge of the box on set pieces, and I just chalked it up to, that just kind of happens, when I really forgot that I could change set pieces at all. If you'd showed me this video 2 years ago and this was on a list of mistakes that I was making, I probably would have just assumed that I was washed. Maybe I am. The set piece coach is great and all, but they set up a set piece marking thing that had 0 people on the edge of the box. And I just turned my brain off to the point that I didn't remember I could go into set pieces and actually change anything that was happening with my set pieces. The set piece coach gives you the guidelines, but you see what's happening on the field and you need to react to it. I could have saved myself multiple goals if I'd remembered that. You probably thought this list was going to be shorter, but you got to be able to point out your flaws so that you can improve them. Because I also waste huge swaths of the transfer window without a plan. We've all been there. You hit the transfer window and you're basically just waiting for something to happen. Particularly myself, I've made so many guides about how to buy players that I know if I get to the last day of the window, there might be some great free loans available. But what I find is often I get to the last day of the window and I'm scrambling to get a bunch of guys in that I could have gotten a month ago. I usually have my plan for the transfer window in place by the time I hit deadline day. This goes back to me just being lazy. At the start of a transfer window, I can have most of my transfer plan in place. Of course, this is different than if you have a couple of very talented players on your team and you're just going to wait to see which one you might sell, and that'll free up any potential moves in the future. But even in that situation, you can map out what those moves are going to be. Then, of course, as the window goes, you can track any potential changes in their value or loan value, but having those targets acquired and being able to go after them can save you a lot of time, money, and give the player a lot more time to adapt before you start the season. All of which I just miss out on constantly. But at least I create incredibly dramatic deadline days. Nice. Content. I also just don't really use player instructions. Sure, during an off match, if I see somebody shooting too much or dribbling too much, I'll go into their player instruction and tell them not to do it. But when actually constructing my tactic, or if I have certain players with certain tendencies that I hate, I just don't go into the player instructions and set them. And of course, you can personalize those player instructions. So if you just really don't want Luke Shaw to try and go on long dribbling runs, which I don't, I can just set him to dribble less and it'll be there all season. Or multiple seasons, honestly. I should utilize this, and I don't. And I have no idea why I don't. Because there are matches where I would do this, but I always want this to be true. And to be perfectly honest, on every fullback ever, you should have shoot less often be included as one of those. The next mistake I make a lot is particularly relevant in the Premier League. You know, I don't mean to toot my own horn. I do a great job of rotating players between matches. What I do not do a good job of is reducing the intensity within matches. If you're up 2 or 3 goals against a team in the bottom half of the league, you don't need to be full tempo gegenpressing your butt off the entire rest of the match. If you have a preset tactic that can control the match more, still give you a chance to score but not be as hectic or hard on the legs, that's going to allow your players to recover a lot easier. It's going to prevent fatigue issues, it's going to keep them healthier, it's going to reduce injuries, all of which I just typically don't take advantage of because by the time I'm up 2 or 3, I'm already having celebratory cocktails in the dressing room while my team mops up the last 40 minutes while I'm not paying attention. There's also the strategy I've heard of if your team looks more tired than the opposition, you kind of rest them for the first 30 minutes and then you go all out for the last 60 so that you're kind of more even with the team you're going up against. I don't do that either, so we'll chalk that up to something that I also should be doing. And even though I am a passionate believer in full squad rotation, I don't save lineups, which, considering how much I play Football Manager, has probably wasted days of my life because I go through and select, each player. But if you just save your starting lineup and your backup lineup, you can load that up and then change 1 or 2 players and you'll be ready to go based off what's going on. If you don't know how to do that, it's literally right here. You just, there. Boom. I feel like a lot of this stuff is me just turning my brain on. Like, it's just really hard to have your brain on all the time to be able to do all this stuff. But hopefully, this is a good therapeutic exercise for me. I'm going to do more of this. And then there's the biggest one. The lesson I learned on my most recent save, where I was trying to battle Nick RTFM for, what he was able to accomplish in a 1-season challenge with Manchester United. And that's that I don't account for adapting time. I don't. I went into the 1-season challenge and signed almost everybody on this list. Me being me, I dropped a truly ridiculous number of loans into the team. I also signed these 5 guys on top of Højlund, Mount, and Andre Onana, who had also joined the team at the start of this year. Adaptability is a big part of the game. Learning your teammates' names, becoming friends with them, building up team cohesion, and I typically just try to get the best talent I can on the field instead of trying to get the best out of the talent that's already at the club. This is a tough line to walk because it's not like I'm ever going to want to stop myself from signing talented players, but when it comes to adding 5 more rotation players that I'm going to want to put on the field because I like their attributes, it's going to be a little while before they're able to perform at the level of somebody like Harry Maguire. It just is, because Harry Maguire's way more familiar with the surroundings. This can create a lot of inconsistency and things like a 3-0 loss on the road to Brentford that would eventually sink my challenge to win the Premier League and match what RTFM did. And to his credit, he kept the team much more the same than I did. And while signing Fischer Kvaratskhelia was great, He spent most of the year trying to adjust to being in the team. And did I really need Marcelo Wygant in Jesper Lindstrom? Probably not. But thank you for attending my therapy session. I do some good stuff on Football Manager too, though this is a video about how I build super teams within the game if you ever, want to do that sort of thing. If you're into that kind of thing. I don't know. Probably. If you're here. Hey. You come here often?